Hello, thank you for checking out today's show. Real quick, I do have one correction before we start. I mentioned the documentary Northern Nights, Starry Skies, and I incorrectly mentioned it as a PBS production. I just want to set the record straight real fast. The Northern Nights, Starry Skies production is actually of PBS North in Duluth, Minnesota, and Hamline University's Center for Global Environmental Education in St. Paul, Minnesota. Thank you and enjoy the show. Light Pollution News, December 2023 VIP session Under the Bridge. We finish out 2023 with a great panel, folks. Youth Advocate Bonnie Peng returns. Stephen Hummel of the McDonald Observatory and Mr. Travis Novitsky of the Grand Portage Anishinaabe Nation joins us for a vibrant discussion. Asking, hey, is light pollution really a pollutant? What about the mental health effects of dislodged circadian rhythms? And how about this? We're seeing the rise of drone shows. It's time for another Light Pollution News. There's much to talk about this episode, the last one of 2023. All this and way more coming right up. All right, welcome to another Light Pollution News, friends, the last published show of 2023. Can you believe that? Wow, I'm your host, Bill McGeaney, bringing you all of the news in, of, and around the topic of light pollution. For those of you not familiar with Light Pollution News, all the transcripts and articles from this show can be found over at lightpollutionnews.com. This month, I am joined by a great panel here, many shared interests of the disappearing night. I want to welcome two first-timers, including Mr. Stephen Hummel. Now, Stephen, I first learned of you from the article you forwarded to us back in June. For those of you at home, while forwarding articles may not necessarily get you on a show, I'm never going to say no to this. And Stephen, when you forwarded this to me, it was before you had I think it was CBS that picked up the story, right? It seems as though you did the impossible in Texas. You had industry actually realize the benefit from responsible, effective outdoor lighting at night. Care to explain?
Yeah, thanks. I am the Dark Skies coordinator for McDonald Observatory in far west Texas. So as part of my job, I work with all the governments, businesses, parks, etc., out in far western Texas to preserve the night sky. And although we're in a really dark area, through a twist of geology and fate, I guess, one of the darkest places in Texas borders one of the brightest areas in Texas, which is the Permian Basin oil field, which per capita is one of the brightest or most light polluted places on planet Earth. So no one lives there, but it's as bright as the city sky. And that's mostly from workplace floodlights on oil and gas rigs and all of the support infrastructure. So I work with them. I work with not just companies, but trade organizations and other nonprofits on coming up with lighting solutions that benefit them, that preserve workplace safety, and preserve the night sky. So it's an uphill battle. There are millions of lights out there, and I get them one at a time. But we're working with several major operators on rolling out better lighting, and it's already having some impact. And we have a long way to go, but we're cleaning it up one light at a time.
Did you find when those stories because they hit the national media, when those stories hit the media, did you find that there were some businesses around there that wanted to go to you to maybe look at how they impact the environment or how they impact the area?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I didn't see much after the CBS segment, which was back in the summer. And I think that's mostly just due to audience. We're a really rural area, and most people just look at local news. So I found that our local papers, which maybe have a readership of a few thousand, gets me to the audience I need faster than the big news organizations. So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I did get people reaching out to me, but most of the people who reached out to me lived far away, and so I think I didn't have a lot of capacity to help them as I can for people who live around here.
Well, talk about far away. Mr. Travis Novitsky, you live on the other end of the country up in Minnesota. And Travis, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you on. I remember watching the Northern Nights, Starry Skies hour-long documentary that PBS made, and I was blown away. One of my favorite documentaries I saw this year, especially there's many that came out this year pertaining to the night sky, but this one, it weaved together Native American culture so well with the natural environment, and I love the story it told. How was it? How did this show come about?
First, I'd just like to introduce myself in my native language. Buju, Travis Indigenous Cause, Makwa, Indudem, Gitchioниgaming, and Dunjaba, which means, hi, my name's Travis. I am Bear Clan, and I come from Grand Portage, and Grand Portage is at the very northeast tip of Minnesota, which is a very, very remote area, like areas of Texas. I visited Big Bend, and I would say that area is pretty comparable to where I live. There's not a lot of people, and there's a lot of great dark skies. And Grand Portage is an Indian reservation, so I am a tribal member here. And I've been into photography for 25 years plus. And because I grew up in this area with such dark skies, as long as I can remember, I've been a fan. I've been a lover of the dark skies. My dad was into photography when I was little. And my mom said even at a very young age, when I was about maybe 5 years old, he would go out to shoot, and I always wanted to go with him. And I don't, really remember that, but I think it must have helped instill, an appreciation for it. And just by nature living here, of course, have an appreciation for it. But Northern Night Starry Skies, it came about because I had been, probably started dabbling in night sky photography around the year 2000, I think, early 2000s. And that's kind of when digital cameras, at least the ones I had, started to really become capable of capturing the night sky in any sort of decent way. And from there, it's just expanded. And because I think largely because of my access to good dark skies and my passion for photographing them, started to become really known for it in the region and throughout Minnesota and kind of the Midwest and beyond, really. So a few years ago, a couple of guys, John Shepard and Tracy Frieden from Hamlin University's Center for Global Environmental Education, approached me and wanted to interview me and record a presentation I was doing for the Grand Prairie, Minnesota Cook County Dark Sky Festival. And my presentation was largely based on dark skies, and they got excited about it and wanted to do more. And so we started talking about a film, and that culminated in the release of Northern Night Starry Skies November of last year. And it's had really good response. It's been in a couple of film festivals and has done well. And as you mentioned, it seems like there's a lot of interest in it, nationwide, even overseas. I had one group reach out to me from Spain that wanted to air it for their local dark sky group.
Yeah,
so pretty exciting.
It tells a story so well, and it engages people in a night sky, whereas so often I see, and this is no knock on you, Stephen, because I do the same thing. So often I see is that we engage people in the night sky based on from a scientific or an astronomical perspective, but the rich storytelling, everyone can connect with those stories, and they can understand them. And learning about, especially having the opportunity to learn about a different culture and to understand what these stories mean to the culture. And then you realize that you can actually see these stories play out every night. And it's that's what I loved about that video. That was such a great piece.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And I agree. It's important to have the science, of course, but, to help relate it for people, it's you got to kind of make it a personal connection to really deepen that sense of appreciation and understanding, I think.
Well, we have one last person on the show, not least, not at all. We have one of my favorite guests that we've ever had on Light Pollution News, and the recipient of the 2023 Dark Sky Rising Star Award, Youth Advocate, Ms. Bonnie Peng. Welcome back.
Bill, joining you will always be my pleasure, but, since you brought up my award, I guess it's your pleasure this time. But I really haven't gotten the chance to debrief, wow, I won an award. I just had to had that knowledge just sitting there in the back of my head, and I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. But yeah, it's really cool. And yeah, I don't know. Feels weird.
How have you been? We haven't had you on since, I think, sometime in the spring, right? I think it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So how's life been? How's your senior year, right?
Senior year, it's just so stressful. Like right now, it's the prime time of applying to colleges and like doing the financial aid stuff. So like I'm bothering my mom. She's getting bothered by me. It's like crazy. And then I'm going to my counselors every day and just like complaining, like, I don't know how to fill this out. It's crazy. And like, plus I have to keep up with my schoolwork and like my sports and stuff like that. So yeah, hopefully the season passes and I'll just be in college by the time I know it.
Well, next year. So just give it a year. You'll be there. And you'll be more busy. So just wait for that.
Wait, don't tell me that. But yeah, don't worry. I'll make sure my new fame won't steal your spotlight today.
Oh no, please. You're welcome to it.
Thanks, Phil.
Well, let's start things up, shall we? So real fast, this weekend, we're recording the weekend of F1 over in Vegas. And I just found this article to be kind of funny. I know we've spoken about the Sphere a lot.
I actually wrote about the Sphere in one of my college essays. I wrote about like how we first talked about it in light pollution news and how I became so interested in it and how that really like sparked my like journey to actually become an advocate for like all the other lightings out there.
Ah, so good things have come from the Sphere. Look at that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, did you know that the F1 banned the Sphere from using 3 different colors during the race? Because the trackside signage is in, I guess they have specific colors they use. So the Sphere couldn't display red, yellow, or blue. And I don't know if that's like a solid or if it had to be skewed to like, I don't know how you don't, I'm assuming these are just strictly solid colors because, I mean, how do you do anything without red, yellow, and blue? But anyway, I found that interesting. And
by F1? Is it Formula 1?
That's right. Yep, they had a big race over in Vegas this weekend.
Yeah, I'm a big motorsport fan, so when I saw that piqued my interest, kind of an intersection of 2 things I'm interested in. But I could definitely see why it might be a problem to have a giant distracting multicolored sphere just at the corner of your vision. And especially if you're driving a car fast, you have limited time to process all of the different signals going on. So I can see how that could be a problem. But I think it's a problem not just for F1, but all drivers. One of my first thoughts when I saw that sphere was, well, if you're driving along, it's really distracting. Just like those other electronic billboards that are constantly changing and grabbing your attention. I think it's kind of a hazard just for any driver.
Stephen, I thought the exact same thing. And that cracked me up when I read that. I was like, well, so F1 drivers get a pass, but everyone else gets distracted by this giant eyeball that's watching them drive down the road. Hey, what do we know, right?
How far away is it visible?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Stephen, I'm a motorsports fan as well as Travis. I am sad to say that I did not actually look at the track layout.
It's pretty close. I have a feeling if you're sitting in an F1 car really low to the ground with the stands and everything around you, it's going to be tough to see. But I did see photos and things, and they did program the little face to watch the cars go around. It's very close. It's maybe half a mile. I don't know, something like that. But definitely, if you're in the stands, it's extremely visible.
It turned out to be a good race. There's that, even if it's a garbage time race, right? The biggest news we had this month. So the biggest news we had this month came from a new publication of the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B, which featured a whole issue dedicated to light pollution's impact on ecology. This is the second light pollution theme Science Journal of 2023. If you recall, we had the Science Magazine issue that focused on light pollution way back in July. At least that's when I got it. I think that's July is when it came out. So my question to you guys, and this is what the articles, the very first article prefaced with, is light pollution a pollutant or simply a nuisance?
I definitely think it's a pollutant, but I guess I can understand how, like, in the scheme of like all the world conflicts, that it might not be the most striking issue. But I think finding a balance between like addressing the negative effects of light pollution and meeting the practical needs of society is a challenge that requires more consideration and maybe like the implement of like responsible lighting practices.
Yeah, I was struck by that article, and of all the dozen or so articles in that issue, that one it grabbed my attention more because it's an issue I deal with every day. Because how I define and how I talk about light pollution changes a lot based on who I'm talking to and who my audience is and what I know they're going to be sympathetic to or not. So I work with the oil and gas industry a lot, and even just the word pollution can make people shut doors, and you have to be very careful about the messaging you use. So I always come at it from a safety perspective first and talk about, using light well to create safe environments, et cetera, not wasting light. So when I say light pollution in that context, I'm using the definition that the authors don't like, which is it's a light that is wasted, whereas the case they're making is it's all light can behave as a pollutant, which is true. But if that's the first thing you say, people are going to get a little defensive, and you have to think very carefully. So it's one of those cases where I definitely try to soften the message to just let them at least hear my case out, because if I just go by the definition they advocate for, I would not get anywhere.
Travis, I want to hear from you on this one.
Well, yeah, I definitely think it's more than a nuisance. And in working on the documentary, I learned a lot about how it affects, of course, circadian rhythms and, animal migration. So I don't know if there's a word in between pollutant and nuisance, because I get what Stephen's saying too. Like, you have to be careful with the messaging and kind of soften it a little bit for a lot of audiences. But the fact that, animal migrations get affected, and even us humans, if we have bright lights outside of our bedroom windows at night, it affects our quality of sleep. So that's more than a nuisance to me,
I will say that I'm continually surprised by even people, environmentalists, ecologists, biologists who are completely unaware of light pollution as a subject. And they're the people I really think who should know this. And I've heard many biologists even say, light pollution isn't as serious as climate change or as, particulates in the air and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, I'm constantly having to educate people who work in the field of pollution in general. So I think that there is a point in that, the way we've talked about light pollution in the past has made it seem less severe than it probably is. It really is.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the authors, Barra and Falchi, were talking about right there, saying that, we had initially, it was more directed at kind of identifying like murkiness in the sky, right? It was more from an astronomical perspective. People would say the phrases like useful light versus polluting light. We would have something like inappropriate or excessive light, which kind of makes it feel like, well, we're not talking about the actual light itself, right? We're kind of talking about a byproduct of what we deem the light to be, whereby the authors came right out and said, it's a form of energy. It's produced by human activity. It alters the natural concentrations already apparent in the environment and causes, as we see, harm to human health, the environment, and the ecology, as Travis had mentioned before. So from that standpoint, right, it looks like a pollutant. But then we need to soften this, right? Like, I feel like you always have to apologize for bringing up the topic of light pollution to people. Am I wrong?
And I've noticed too, like with some folks, you bring it up and they go, they just kind of try to brush it off. And it's like, no, this is important. Of course, for, I spent some time this week listening to your previous 2 or 3 episodes. And one of the things that really struck me was, I don't remember which episode it was, but you had a guest on and they were talking about someone's neighbor with really, really bright floodlights in their backyard or something. And the person who was next door didn't want the lights. Of course, the lights are unnecessary to be that bright all night long. But how do I relate to that person? And the story was told about, I think, equating it to like blasting music all night long would be kind of the same thing. It's, well, if I had a loud party in my backyard and you didn't like the music, you would say something to me, right? It's the same thing. Like your lights are intruding into my space. I don't know what I'm getting at here, really, but
it's all good, Travis. Well, again, that goes on to the nuisance side, right? The pollutant side, we have plenty of documentation, plenty of research, especially this year that came out, talking about the pollutant side. And I'll just name some of the ecological ones that came out of the transactions, the B journal. And that was, Allen was shown to impact soil consistency, affecting the respiration and carbon use efficiencies of soil.
That soil consistency really, I was like, wow, that one really caught my eye.
Right. All the way down.
Surprised.
Yeah, all the way down to the soil, right? Artificial light affects invertebrate activity, spiking predation rates when the sky glow was apparent. There's a study on composition of moth communities. In a study, it was found that sky glow decreased moth abundance and species richness. Artificial light plays a role in reducing survival of mussels and barnacle larvae. And another study, the artificial light was proven to reduce plant biomass by 33%, and a similar drop in proportional diversity of plant populations of the study, which included grasses, herbs, and legumes. I mean, that seems like a pollutant.
Yeah, I feel like our nightlife in nature is really taking a beating. Like as high schoolers, I feel like we're so often caught up in our own world. But these studies really show like the consequences of our bright city lights extend far beyond our surroundings. And like maybe it's time we dim those lights a bit and let our fellow earthlings have their own party in the dark.
And Travis, you go out to great locations, right? I know you like to be outdoors and go out to some great spots. And I assume at night is kind of when we allow animals to kind of live now, right? In many parts of the U.S. because they're not going to be able to exist much on daytimes, a lot of people around, and whatnot. At nighttime, usually people go inside. So you get a lot more activity.
Well, yeah, for sure. It's, I think, fairly widely known that many species, many animals are more active at night. They're kind of hunkered down during the day, and at night is when they hunt. At night is when they maybe travel. So it's, the more light we have, it really, really affects those things. And of course, one of the glaring, most, I guess, shocking examples maybe is, I can't remember where I saw it recently, but I saw a photograph of the number of birds that were killed in one night by striking a tall office building in a city. And it was huge. It was hundreds of birds just from one night.
Yeah, that's Chicago.
Mm-hmm. And the staff or something had collected them and kind of laid them all out. And I was just like, seeing them all laid out like that was very eye-opening. Yeah. But and of course, I should mention the cultural side too, of course, right? Like, because that's kind of what books about a little bit, the documentaries about, is cultural connection to the sky. And, the more light pollution we have, the less visible stars we have, the cultural knowledge and that cultural connection starts to kind of fade as well, and eventually get lost because you just don't. If you can't see the stars anymore as a people, you're not talking about them as much. The stories kind of fade, and there's a lot of reasons it's not good.
There's on the birds, just real fast on birds. There's probably not an episode, Travis, that we go through with that doesn't talk about birds.
Oh, I'm sure.
And artificial light at night has been found to actually increase bird metabolism. So birds residing in light polluted areas burn through an increased amount of lipid energy than they otherwise would. Lipids being a primary energy source, fueling bird muscles over migratory flight. So an article from Genetica also looked at mantis shrimps and found that there's a day-night metabolic difference, confirming the importance of a dark environment, right? To conserve energy, reduce metabolism. Thus, the trend of a consistent vocal chorus identifying ecological impacts from what we do at night, from the lights that we put up at night.
There's been such an explosion of papers lately. I mean, in the past really 3 or 4 years, especially, so many new papers coming out on all the different impacts of artificial light at night on wildlife and biology. It's almost hard to keep track. But I don't know if there's one in particular I kind of wanted to discuss. I don't know if it's on your list, but there's a recent paper from Travis Longcore, UCLA. Travis Longcore is a big name in the field of artificial light at night and in wildlife. But they looked at mountain lions and where they would travel in Southern California. And mountain lions are, a top predator. Well, at least now they are in California. They weren't always. They used to be bears too. But, we don't really often think about light pollution and the larger species, but it affects them too. And they found that in that study, they avoided lit areas. But actually, interestingly enough, that contradicts another study on mountain lions that came out a few years ago in Utah, which found that mountain lions were following the mule deer, which they, hunt, into lit areas. And the mule deer that they theorized were attracted to lit areas because they associated that with either safety or, people's gardens and lawns and all, things to eat. And the mountain lions in that case, in that study, weren't afraid of the light at all. And it kind of almost made the case that it was a false sense of security for the deer. It kind of reminds me of what we talk about lighting and crime a lot, where, it just helps the criminals, or in this case, the predators, see what they're doing better.
You hear stuff from people saying that I'll put a light out to kind of keep the bear away, or, black bears.
Yeah.
And the bears don't care about the light. They're going after your trash can. That's what they care about. And, to the point that it does impact some areas, it does impact some behaviors, and other behaviors it may or may not, right? It's not a uniform. It's not uniform even interspecies. Like even from an ecological standpoint, like if you talk about maybe the ones in Utah are just a different subset than the ones in California.
Yeah. They grew up under very different conditions. Yeah. Yeah. It makes me question, in 10 years, what are we going to unlearn or realize was incorrect now, or, realize wasn't as broadly applicable? That's just the nature of science, right? We learn more. But right now we have this huge explosion. We're learning a lot. And I'm sure 10 years from now, we're going to realize maybe not all of it was what we thought.
Well, let's finish up the ecology side here. And here's one. I found this really interesting. So ecologists in Belfast are working hard to bring back their famous starling murmuration. And for those of you at home who aren't aware of what a murmuration actually visually looks like, it's a fantastic show put on by a dense flock of, in this case, starlings that generate warmth and kind of share feeding information. So the starlings could be seen as recent as 2018, but then they installed new LED lights on around under the Albert Bridge. In recent years, the LED lights have actually brightened the bridge so much that starling counts have since dropped to a trickle. To help bring those birds back, some ecologists worked to reduce the lights on the bridge. So lights underneath and on the side of the bridge were actually removed, and then the lighting on top of the bridge was dimmed and changed to red. They don't have any firm results yet, but they're looking and they're hopeful that the starlings will actually return back to the bridge. So that's an interesting little piece of ecological news going on, where they saw a situation. Now they're going to try and see if they can roll it back, because it looks like before the LEDs were there, you had this murmuration going on.
Yeah, I mean, who knew LED lights could be such a party pooper for these birds? But honestly, kudos to the ecologists for trying to fix this stuff, taking down the lighting, just dimming the glow and switching to red vibes. It's like they're giving the starlings a VIP section under the bridge, and fingers crossed it works and the starlings make a comeback. It's like waiting for your favorite band to drop a new album, Starlings.
I think we just found the title of the show right there. So, great job, Bonnie.
Yeah, I like that description.
So the second piece of big news came in the form of nighttime entertainment, and I'm sure we've all seen these by now, and they're actually quite stunning. So it should come as no surprise. Here in North America, as the skies grow darker, we start having drone shows take more and more center stages. In Central Park, a new drone show seek to actually mimic the starling murmuration. It's short shows, 6-minute shows, multiple shows a night. So it's part of a public art trend that New York is looking to foster and grow. In Tennessee, at Dolly Parton's amusement park, carefully chosen choreographed drone shows strike a really stunning visual to close out the night. So they have this nice storybook ending to every night at Dollywood. And then, never to be outdone, Disney has actually filed patents to create custom drone-controlled puppets and 3D drone displays. Drone shows cost a fraction of the price of Disney's nightly fireworks show. And add to that, as anyone with a dog will actually attest, they impart much less traumatic noise stress on local ecologies. So drone shows are coming, and they're going to be more popular, especially in probably 2024.
It's like the night sky's turning into this giant canvas for some like seriously cool art. And like I read one of the articles, like the Central Park one mimicking starling formations. Like that's kind of next level poetic. But like, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Like there's light pollution, and I don't know if they're ready to address that. I mean, though they are cool, but like still, at what cost?
Is it better?
Yeah, and noise pollution too, which can definitely be just as harmful, even if they're doing drone shows or drone activity in the daytime. It's been known to disturb wildlife. Yeah.
Well, Stephen, is it better than, say, fireworks? I feel like drone shows probably better than fireworks.
That was actually one of my thoughts when I was reading this. Is I don't know, but certainly fireworks are loud and bright. I don't know. Maybe this is actually a slightly more ecologically friendly alternative to fireworks. But I'd love to see a study comparing them.
I know last year there was concern about having these drone shows in New York because of bird migrations. I'm not sure what altitude birds are flying through New York, but with bright cities, they go and flock to the cities because there's plenty of feeding to be had. So that's an interesting piece. But we'll have to keep an eye on it. But it is something, a new trend. And to your point, Bonnie, they are really artistic. At what point do we value art? Like, I mean, it is something that is visually appealing and enjoyable to look at.
Definitely, like they're very mesmerizing shows, but like light pollution is like it's becoming the fine print of our modern entertainment. The more technology advances, I feel like.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. Well, here's one probably for you, Stephen. It's a mystery, or at least it was a mystery. Maybe it still is a mystery. Check this out. Christopher Gainey, writing for Sacred Space Astronomy at the Vatican Observatory, became curious one cloudy night. I presume it was a cloudy night. I don't know why else you'd be looking unless you're bored at work. He began to dig through the VIIRS map on lightpollutionmap.info, and he looked at an area within a day's drive of his house. For those of you at home who are not aware of what VIIRS stands for, is the Visible Infrared Imaging Radiometer Suite. VIIRS is an instrument package placed on top of multiple satellite missions. So if you stroll on over to lightpollutionmap.info, you can actually scroll through the overlays dating all the way back to 2012, which is precisely what Graney did. So Graney noticed that over the course of a 10-year span, a small part of the Wabash River area in the Indiana-Illinois border grew to a brightness of what he considered a small city. Naturally, Graney became curious, so he made the drive, expecting to see some new development or new buildings, warehouses, have you. But there was nothing there. At night, there was hardly a light to be seen. So what was it? And I know, Stephen, you know this one.
Yeah, it's gotta be flaring.
So there's flaring, right? Well, the oil wells, they have dirt pits containing natural gas, and the flare pits would irradiate upwards, and then it would get caught by VIIRS and spike in density as it lit up the night. So it should be noted, per Graney's assessment, is that the pits were not emitting enough light to actually degrade the night sky. Now, I was always under the impression that flares actually were impactful on the night sky.
Yes. So this is, first I want to clarify a really big misunderstanding about those light pollution maps and why this stood out in the first place. Because VIIRS is the scientific instrument, the package on several different satellites that creates these maps. But VIIRS, as you said, it stands for Visible Infrared Imaging Radiometer Suite. It looks at green, red, and infrared light, but it is blind to blue light. So when you look at those maps on lightpollutionmap.info, that there's no blue light in there. And as we know, blue light is one of the most important, parts of the visible spectrum. So it's missing a big piece of the problem. But the other problem with VIIRS is it really overestimates infrared light sources and can make them on the map look really bad. That's kind of why, like, if you look at a map of light pollution, the Bakken shale formation up in North Dakota looks brighter than Chicago. It's bright up there, but it's not quite that bright. That's exaggerating it a little bit. So locally here in West Texas, flaring is not a big contributor to the light pollution we see. And the main way we know that is I actually take a spectrum of the sky glow. And every source has its own unique kind of spectral fingerprint. So we can tease out what kind of light source is making that sky glow we see. Is it a metal halide, a high pressure sodium? Is it an LED? What kind of color LED? Or is it flaring or something else? Because these are going to have their own signature. So locally in West Texas, it's less than 5% of the sky glow we see is from flaring. And the main reason why is although those flares are bright, the red or amber color doesn't scatter as much in the air. So the shorter the wavelength, the more blue it is, the more it washes out the sky. That's why the sky's blue. The more red or infrared, the less it scatters. So it goes more directly up to space and it's less visible from the ground. That's not to say it doesn't scatter at all. So yes, flaring does cause some sky glow, but it is much less of an issue than the maps make it seem, and less of an issue than, say, LED floodlights.
Well, thank you for setting us straight there. Yeah, that was going to be my question, because you looked at, you mentioned it, and you look at the Dakotas, and it's like, looks like it's New York City or something on that map.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Again, it is very bright in the Dakotas. It's very bright out here. I mean, it's still like a city sky, but yeah, it can skew it. So actually, the National Park Service has a different map that isn't up on the lightpollutionmap.info, but I trust it much more. Then it's called the All Sky Light Pollution Ratio map. And the last full set was in 2018, but it does take into account blue light, and it does try to correct that sort of imbalance with infrared that VIIRS has. So
how's that map pieced together? What's the data source?
It is satellite info combined with ground-based measurements, such as we have a camera system here at the observatory, and the National Park Service has a lot that create all-sky images to carefully measure light pollution at a given location. And using that data helps calibrate and inform the map. So it's not just satellites; there's ground truth established as well to make sure that the satellites are representing the situation right.
Well, this next one here, Travis, this might be something up your alley. There's an article from the CBC this past month that was talking about losing our access to night sky, and essentially is akin to losing the whole repository of human cultures and traditions. And you spoke to this a little bit earlier. The disconnect from night sky traditions due to light pollution impoverishes our society artistically, from music to visual arts. Writer and amateur astronomer Cheryl-Lynn Uhrig posits that if an artist never saw the starry sky, how would she know how to paint it? And
interesting.
Right.
And and that kind of course plays into that statistic of 80% of the world's population lives where they will never see the Milky Way. That's just unbelievable to me. I mean, I never take it for granted that I am very fortunate that I get to see the Milky Way every night if I step out my front or back door. But yeah, I think even having the access, the night sky sparks a lot of my creativity, and not being able to see it would definitely impact that for sure. And yeah, how do you, no matter what the subject is, whether it's the Milky Way or let's say a beautiful display of Northern Lights, if you've never seen it yourself with your own eyes, maybe you've seen photographs of it, but that's not the same. How do you turn that into a piece of art? That's a good question. Or that's an interesting thought process.
Yeah, this topic really struck a chord within me, and it has me thinking about how our connection to the night sky isn't just about the stars. It's kind of losing a piece of our shared human experience. And I totally get that point. How do you even capture the magic of the starry night or the Milky Way if you've never seen one? And as a high schooler, I feel like our generation might miss out on something vital if light pollution keeps us from truly experiencing the night sky. And it's not just about nostalgia. It's about preserving a source of inspiration and wonder for future artists, scientists, dreamers. And maybe we can't package up the night sky, but finding ways to bring it back into our lives seems crucial. And yeah, thanks for bringing this topic to us, Bill.
I find, Travis, I'm just like you. When I go out to a dark sky location, I always feel energized and I always feel happy. And because your brain is always working under the stars. You have that creativity spark is just kind of, making its way around your head. And it feels right.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that being under the night sky, your brain is always working. I think that's true for sure, but it's a different, when I speak to a group about my photography, one of the biggest takeaways I want people to leave with is, that at least sharing my own experience about it. For me, it's a very mindful, kind of relaxing, peaceful thing. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. Like, nowadays with our modern culture and, cell phones, we're always scrolling on our phones. And I know, like, I can only do that for a minute or two and my eyes go crazy, with the scrolling. But, and just everything, having to work, we're inundated with ads, we're inundated with lights anytime we go anywhere, of course, anytime the sun goes down, and it's bright everywhere, even to an extent where I live. But taking all of that and of course I do work at full time in addition to doing photography, and I work in public service. So I for the Minnesota State Park System. So I see a lot of people, and that is energizing in its own way, but it's also exhausting. It takes a lot out of you. And so when I work a long day and I've seen, 500-600 people come through the park that I work at, I need to kind of go spend time by myself. And the best way to do that is to go out under the stars and just take my camera and take a little time and just sit there and be with everything that's around you, and eventually take some pictures. Maybe sometimes I don't even take pictures, but for me, being under that sky is the most grounding, centering component of my life.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I want. But I hope that people will come away from one of my presentations is with a sense of that, and with the sense of the importance of that, and who knows, maybe it's not the night sky for others, but everybody, I think, has something that does that for them. And I think increasingly with the awareness and with dark sky topics, we've got so many areas. There's one tribal dark sky nation now, I believe, that's actually been in existence or had got their designation about 8 years ago. But so far, they're the only tribal nation to have a designation. But, there's communities, there's parks that are constantly being added to the list. So there's a lot of, as each day goes by, there's more awareness of it. And I think with that, at least in my area, people really want to travel north to see the Northern Lights. I live about 5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. But that's within reach for a lot of people. It's a 5-hour drive isn't anything to them when we live in, Minnesota, not compared to Texas, of course, but it's a fairly large state, and people think nothing of heading up to the North Shore of Lake Superior and, driving 3 to 5 hours for the big maybe that they'll see Northern Lights. So it's all very timely right now with everything that's going on and the interest in it.
Yeah, it's very inspirational, right, for those people.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have all seen the Northern Lights, but I've seen them a lot, and I've been with people who have seen them for the first time, and that I think is one of the most magical things you'll ever experience, is being with someone who's never seen the Aurora Borealis. Their reaction is just, it hits me right here every time, like hits me right in my heart, because it brings me right back to when I first was noticing them and kind of reminding me of that.
I hope to see them someday. I have not seen them yet, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing them, Travis. We're talking about this winter, maybe, but we'll see if that happens.
We're in solar maximum right now, they say. So, the next year or so should yield more opportunities, and then the trend will be going down again to solar minimum. But
I see the northern lights in your Zoom background. Did you take that picture?
I did. Yeah, that's actually the image for the cover of my book that just came out. And if I can lean to the side a little bit, you'll see the Milky Way is on one side and the northern lights on the other. And it's a northeast Minnesota lake, but it's, if I can throw a little bit of cultural reference in here.
Yeah, please do.
For the Dakota people, and I learned this, through the process of working on the book with Annette Lee, who wrote the text for it. And Annette Lee is an astrophysicist. She's the founder of Native Sky Watchers, and she is of Dakota ancestry, where I'm Ojibwe. And there are some similarities across cultures, but the Dakota really have this. There's a word for it called kapemini, and it's kind of that connection between earth and sky, which is illustrated so well when you have a nice calm lake and you've got the Milky Way up there and in the sky, and it's reflected almost perfectly below in the water, where if you were to flip that image upside down, you couldn't tell which way is actually up.
That is a spectacular shot. Travis, I'm always amazed at your photos.
Thank you.
I've jumped around in your site, and I really... you take some... I hope one day to be as good in night sky photography as you are. This is amazing stuff you do.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm just going to share a real quick passage from the book here, if I can. So the very name of the state of Minnesota has been appropriated from the Dakota phrase Minnesota Makoche, which translates as the land where the waters reflect the skies or heavens. And this idea of reflection and connection to the sky is a fundamental theme of Dakota cosmology. And the word for this twin relationship or pairing of earth and sky is kapemini. And this single word contains an entire cosmological philosophy. And that it's typically translated as it is above, it is below. And that oversimplifies, but it speaks directly to this critical indigenous-based worldview of a mirrored relationship between earth and sky.
Oh, that is great. That is.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it really is a beautiful picture. Thank you so much, Travis.
And I think you do kind of see that. I'm again, like all of us, we're always learning more, right? But you see elements of that connection in other cultures around the world too. That the earth, this concept of the earth and sky being connected.
Without
Speaking of auroras, well, Bill, I'm going to give you some news before it comes out. Actually, I think.
Look! Breaking news!
But I've seen the auroras here from Texas. When there's a really big event, it's pretty rare, but we can see them low on the horizon. But lately, we've been seeing them above McDonald Observatory almost every week or two from man-made activity from Starlink. And so some explanation is in order. But when a Falcon 9 rocket leaves Cape Canaveral in Florida, comes all the way around the Earth, and that they deploy the Starlink satellites, and much has been said about their impact on astronomy and all of that. But when the second stage of the rocket returns to Earth, it burns its engine for just a couple of seconds, way up high at the same altitude auroras occur. And when that engine burn occurs, it creates what we call an ionospheric hole, which glows red. And it can glow red for anywhere between 10 to 30 minutes. And they're very bright. For a few seconds, it's brighter than, say, the ISS. It's but over an area, maybe 10 times the area of the moon in the sky. Really hard to, you could definitely see it in a city. Wow. And then it lingers red and a little bit of green for several minutes. So effectively, Starlink launches are creating artificial aurora, although only over our particular spot in West Texas. But for us as an observatory, it's actually kind of impactful, and we're losing science observations to it because It's so bright.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so bright. It is affecting us. So it's pretty for a bit, but it is actually kind of a cause for concern. And with more and more rocket launches occurring all the time, this phenomenon is going to be more and more common, probably throughout the world, as these rocket bodies re-enter and intentionally sort of deorbit themselves, they cause this effect, as well as when they go up too. As it was a known phenomenon going up, as the rocket launches from California and Florida occur, sometimes it happens, but it's now a weekly thing. So, yeah.
Wow.
So,
Did not
Stephen,
know.
is this where I've seen photos of, I think what you're talking about, where it's probably the light as it's fading, but it just looks like a big gas cloud in the sky, or is that something else?
That's similar. Yeah. So usually those photos are when they go up, the launch process. And yeah, that can, the big colorful, the really bright part is the exhaust gases themselves reflecting sunlight. But if it occurs later at night, or if you look again later, then it can glow red, as it's basically those gases interacting with a chemical reaction in the upper atmosphere. Yeah. So yeah, it's related.
Yeah, I've often wondered, because I never see anything like that up where I live, but I've seen a lot of photos and just wondered what it's like in person. How big is it really in the sky, apparent to our eye? How bright is it? And it sounds like it's very impactful.
Yeah, it's very big and very bright. Yes.
So Inside Hook ran a piece that was discussing light pollution and its impacts, and they cited 3 sources or 3 documents. And one of them was the Chicago Alley Lighting Project, which showed that crime actually increased in the areas after a new, brighter alley light was put on, say, transit stations. And a 2015 study that showed improved street lighting didn't affect roadway collisions. But this is the one that really kind of got me. I never thought about this. A 2018 article that showed that night vision can atrophy, as it has in apparently 37% of people in the U.S. If you don't experience a natural night environment, you can actually lose your ability to see at night. Travis, to your point, like, you go outside and you have no problem probably walking around at night.
No, your eyes adjust pretty quick when you're, when you don't have artificial lights interfering.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that either. Yeah, you can, if you're out of practice, you're not as good. Is that essentially what it's saying?
That's right. And this all comes from the article Light Pollution, the Global Scourge We Like to Ignore by Josh Sims and Inside Hook. So definitely you guys can check that out. We have all links and everything over at lightpollutionnews.com for this article, for this show. But yeah, I found that interesting.
I guess it kind of makes sense because, in a sense, like, our bodies are evolving to our environment, right? So if we have less natural darkness, like, our brains and our eyes are going to equate to, well, we don't need to do that anymore, So
that reminds me of an article that came out last month on birds in San Antonio. They found that the birds that grew up in the city had smaller eyes than the ones that grew up outside the same species.
Yeah, we had that on here. That's kind of amazing.
It's amazing, and it's scary too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you think we'll grow smaller eyes? Is that you're worried about?
Maybe. I don't know enough about, but maybe that was my first thought when I read that article. Is I wonder how humans have changed, in response to how we've changed our environment.
We have a lot more that popped up this month, including some very important health news. But I want to take a quick breather here because we've been really going strong, guys. This has been a really excellent conversation. A lot of great information. So, Stephen, thank you so much for that information on the all-sky light pollution ratio map. That's very helpful. And then, Travis, definitely, you've been instrumental in giving us the, how do you say that again? The
Copemini.
Copemini. Okay.
Copemini. It's Kapemni is how I understand it spelled.
This stuff is great. And this just shows you a little bit about what I try and do here at Light Pollution News. We're about to make it 1 year. Bonnie. Can you believe that? So Light Pollution News, first and foremost, is a community, and you, listener, you help my job become so much more fulfilling and much easier, just to hear back from you guys, to see you guys posting up on Instagram or sending emails out. Stephen, when you sent out that article there, that was excellent. That was so cool of a read to have it right from the source. When I initially set out to do Light Pollution News, I wanted to have a helpful resource for a platform that could help people of all different backgrounds, all stripes, ones who have been approaching this issue for a long time, to ones that have never really thought about and are curious about it. If Light Pollution News isn't achieving these goals, send me a helpful suggestion. I want to hear it. This is our 1 year look back to see what we've done right, what we've done wrong, So you can send any comments, articles, issues you have with me, the show, things you like about it. That would be preferable. Over at bill@lightpollutionnews.com. And if you feel the show has been a valuable resource, why not support it through a monthly subscription plan for prices as low as $3 a month? That's absolutely less than most coffee these days. I can tell you, I live in the city here, and coffee is about $3.50, $3.25. So it's cheaper than that. You can find that link directly in our show notes. Just open up your, say, Apple Podcasts, and it'll be the first link right on there. But if that's not your thing, no worries. How about just giving us a rating or review, whatever platform you're using, probably Apple. And, we really value your input and your suggestions and conversations we have with you. So I want to thank all those subscribers who help us offset some of our server costs and all that work that goes into LPN. Fortunately, it does cost a bit each month, and we truly appreciate your generosity. I came across this interesting article here from the Patch. Check this out. Every second Wednesday at one hotel, South Beach, Miami, the lobby's actually dimmed for a candlelight evening to raise awareness for global brightening. This is Miami. These folks will give 25% of a dark sky cocktail back to Dark Sky International. This is Miami. I don't know who's taking the lead on that one, but kudos to them. We have another article coming from the Columbian Missourian. It highlights an event that is probably going to gain some attention for something folks won't see. Once a month, the University of Missouri has found it in their hearts to turn off the lights at the drop-in rec center, the Stankowski Field. This is being done at the request of volunteers of the University of Missouri Laws Observatory. Previously, the university agreed to turn off lights for 2 hours each month in 2015 to support the International Year of Astronomy. Not only does the observatory now offer visitors the celestial sky, but they will also offer rooftop yoga every first Wednesday. So there you go. A little fun thing to have out there. Hey, AAA subscribers, the Member of VIA magazine actually detailed 5 principles of light pollution in a very easy to read article. I was kind of shocked by this. A great article. They even suggested to folks who wish to needlessly light some outdoor areas to use some, in my mind, some undervalued techniques, including reflective tape or maybe even glow in the dark stuff is what I would suggest. And to kind of reduce your nighttime impact. And this one, Bonnie, this one had me thinking of you. At Southern Illinois University, a zoology student named Sarah Deepa is trying to raise awareness of stadium lighting's impact on natural ecology. Sarah is gathering up 1,000 signatures via change.org petition, which you can most easily ascertain through the show's notes or simply by going over to our Reddit page at r/lightpollutionnews. In the Daily Egyptians article, student newspaper for SIU, the newspaper surveyed some students, of whom the overwhelming majority would be okay with changing the lighting. I want to draw special attention, though, to the terminology used here. And Bonnie, I'm not trying to pick on you, but I'm really curious if you can help us out with the angle here. In one instance, a quote by Deepa read, "I think like 50% of the lights are orangey yellow lights that look outdated, and then half of them are regular lights." And before I give you the floor, Bonnie, there's also another quote. Obviously, we need to make sure no one's going to rob us in the middle of the night. But there are ways around it, I've learned. So give me a little perspective to Deepa. Who's she trying to talk to here?
I kind of get where Deepa's coming from when she brought up reflective tape. I feel like that might seem low tech, but glow in the dark tape too. You got to keep that safe during star parties. And now for the whole stadium lighting situation, I think it's awesome that Sarah's pushing for change. Her phrasing is probably just trying to relate to folks, saying some lights look outdated or regular way is just her way of making it more real, And that bit about how no one's gonna rob us in the middle of the night, it's a classic yeah, we need light, but let's not go overboard. And people of all ages, they're definitely thinking about the balance between safety and keeping things natural. So yeah, go Sarah with those signatures.
Yeah,
awesome.
I don't know if you signed it yet. She was up in the 900, so I strongly recommend anyone go out there and help her out. Definitely great work on her part. And there's a couple others, I guess for lack of a better descriptor, awareness articles. First up from Saltwire, a citizen science project called Counting Stars encourages students to create a cardboard picture frame and count the stars they see through it at night from 5 different locations. This project taking place in Nova Scotia's municipalities of Yarmouth, Clare, and Argyll hopes to speed up acceptance of light pollution as a serious issue. And per the article, these communities have been very slow to recognize the impact of artificial light at night. Participants are encouraged to enter their data at novascotialight.com. So check out the campaign. It's pretty interesting. It's something that I think you could run anywhere. And it's a little bit of a different take on the globe at night. You're actually framing it in something that is be tangible. So it's a box that's very tangible to the user and to that perspective. So I thought that was very interesting. And then we have this other one. On the other end, we had Luca Yoyannis, who was a postdoc researcher at Ruhr University and a guest scientist at German Research Center for Geosciences in Potsdam, Germany, attempted to leverage citizen science to count streetlights in her Time for Night campaign, where she would have participants go out for pretty much all fall from September through November to record light sources and track them as they may have changed over time. 2 little pieces out there.
Yeah. Shout out to Luca for her campaign, like turning the street lighting county into like a citizen science gig. Like, can't wait to hear more updates on that project.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are 2 very transferable projects, right? I think anyone could pick something like that and run that in their own community if they ever wanted to.
Yeah. I like the idea of holding the frame up because I've done globe at night and I've taught people how to do it as well. But I think something about holding it up and say focusing your attention on that area, I think makes it more impactful. It's hard to describe, but I like it. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, maybe I'll even try the star counting thing myself.
Yeah, I'd be really curious on what you have down in Atlantic City. Here in Philadelphia, we have, so where we live, we're outside of the downtown, and I can count about 100 to 110 stars a night. That's about, downtown, I think they count 30. So it's just
wow.
Yep. In human health, big news out of the journal, the Nature Mental Health, in a study involving 86,000 adults aged 55 to 69 years. It was found that greater exposure to nighttime light increased the risk for a whole slew of mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and more. The findings appear in line with other studies on circadian rhythm, including one that showed exposure to light during the daytime similarly reduced said mental health issues, reinforcing the daylight, dark night positive circadian responses.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to comment on that article because I really enjoyed it, and every year I do a program at the observatory for a group called Creative Vets, and they're veterans with PTSD and traumatic brain disorders or other combat related ailments, and so every year they come here to do astrophotography, and they come here for about 4 nights, and they've all said they sleep better. When they stay up at the observatory or astronomers lodge where we're very strict about, closing your curtains. All the lights are amber in the hallways, because the people who use it are primarily nocturnal. But they've all said, this has been great for my mental health, just being here, being under a night sky, sleeping regularly. And so I've known this for a long time, and the veterans have known it for a long time. But it's great to see, a study that really demonstrated on a large scale that this isn't just a one-off thing. So I was really pleased to see that.
So, Steve, we had an additional piece here, and it came from the Journal of Biological Rhythms, where they actually looked at the health benefits of preterm babies. And if they were in a natural circadian environment, they're actually released out earlier. So we do have plenty of studies now kind of packing that in, that the natural circadian environment where you have a dark night and a bright day, and how it actually helps your physiology and your mental health, it's there. And then just to finish it out, there was a article from the National Institute of Health this month with Dr. Mariana Figueroa, Mount Sinai, and the director of the Light and Health Research Center. And among the questions that was posed in the article, I found a discussion of individual light sensitivity variation to be kind of really the most fascinating one, whereby teenagers are more sensitive to blue light than adults, and women overall being more sensitive than men to blue light. There's some health news for this month
I want to kind of take a stab at that because I kind of checked boxes of what they described. So I think part of the article that talks about teenagers being more sensitive to blue light, that might be because like of the technology access that we all have in this generation, like, you know, with TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and all that screen time. And like, I totally get it, but it's such an interesting topic to like study.
It's permeated. Like my parents use their phone, maybe not to the degree that you use a phone, right? But they use the phone still, like, you know, they keep it by their bed. You know, I'm sure they check it before they go to bed and stuff like that. And you know, it's curious. We'll see how this stuff plays out in time. But yeah, I think you have a good point. So we have this one from Canada, this article, and I love this piece. This is my favorite streetlight article we've seen in a while. We have a Darwin Award contestant, and this is good. In an attempt to stay warm, Tara Scott briskly walked the streets of Barnaby, British Columbia on November 11th, 2022. It was then that Scott collided directly with a black, unlit streetlight pole that she claims was placed in the middle of the sidewalk. Scott sued Barnaby for $5,000, and the court returned in favor of the city, citing that it was not unreasonable for streetlight poles to be painted black. Nor were there branches that hid the pole, as Scott contended. And finally, the court found that the pole was readily visible, given the light cast from streetlights on either side of it. And of course, there's a bright intersection over there that actually casts even more light to the side.
When I talk to business owners about lighting, one of the things that they always say is they're afraid of getting sued. You know, it's like, well, we want to do the right thing, but we don't want someone to trip and then sue us. I think that fear is somewhat overblown, but I guess this article proves there are still people out there who are going to try it. But
it seems like you'd probably be able to see it, right? I can envision a seascape, right? You have some lights on the side and you have a brightly lit corner, you know, and you could probably see what's going on. She probably was not paying attention and walked right into the stupid thing.
Yeah, I feel like she also might have been on a real quest to find warmth. I mean, like, I get wanting to stay warm, but then like smacking into a black streetlight, that's a whole nother level. It's kind of like the classic case of, oh, watch where you're going. And then the lesson learns like street light poles are where they're supposed to be, even if they're doing a good ninja impression. Yeah.
Was this where fluff pieces? Next time any of you guys go to LA, you got to check out the Museum of Street Lighting. This museum showcases several dozen fixtures since the late 19th century. I mean, why wouldn't you visit the Museum of Street Lighting over in LA? It's got to be great. Can't wait to see the fixtures they have in the parking lot. That's got to be a good time.
Well, you know what would be interesting about that is if they showed the progression of how lights have changed, right? Like from gas lights to present day lights, because I think that'd be fascinating to see, actually.
Yeah, and I think those are actually on site. You can see the progression.
Yeah.
Yeah, I unironically would go to that because I'm interested, but I don't think I'd get my girlfriend to come with me.
Bonnie, you will go to it too? Is that what you're saying?
I would, yeah. It's cool to see something like some place appreciate the less flashy side of things, and like the world where it is now, like can get a bit sensational, like a museum dedicated to street lighting. Like none of my friends would come with me, but like I'd totally go because, you know, it kind of reminds you like there's interesting things in everyday stuff, even if it's just a humble street light.
And it may be that they were actually done in a way that was artistic or with character, right?
Yeah, that reminds me of lights in Austin, the Moonlight Towers, where they used to have massive towers, almost like
the arc
towers.
Lights.
The arc lights, yeah. So one of them has been kept around. I don't know if it's still working, but for historical reasons, they've kept the tower. And I've often been asked by people in Austin, like, what do I think of that from a light pollution perspective? Because obviously just blasting light across a huge area, not great, but, you know, there's a historic value to it as well, sort of cultural value to this. So again, to me, it's like the original LED ball in Vegas. I don't know, but this one's more historical than that one.
The arc lights definitely had an impact, huh?
Yeah.
Local newscasts, they're never sensationalistic, right? We've never had a local newscast that's been sensationalistic. I see these articles come through. This month we had a newscast from Florida blaming lack of lights as a prime reason why a cyclist was run down and killed by a county deputy in the early hours. Terrible incident. Let's pause for a second on this one. The cyclist is run down in the pre-dawn hours on the side of a 7-lane road, which in flat Florida doubles as a highway. Let's be honest. They put up a bike lane with no barriers or protection adjacent to the 7-lane highway. On the same surface is a paved marking that says bike lane with 3 lanes of directed traffic. It's pre-dawn, so I'm assuming the cyclist had to have some kind of light. You can see the guide. You want to see what's on the ground. So the cyclist probably had like a headlight and maybe even like a back blinking light. But those are all assumptions. Nothing is written about in this piece or spoken about in this piece. There apparently were no streetlights. And the fact that the bike lane was placed on a 7-lane highway couldn't be to blame at all for this. But if we had the magic of light, this county deputy wouldn't have run down and killed this cyclist. That's what the piece is trying to tell you. Am I crazy in thinking that maybe if you had a better engineered integration of a bike lane on a major road, the person wouldn't have been killed?
Yeah, I don't think a streetlight's going to magically fix this situation. It's frustrating how sometimes the focus shifts from addressing real issues to like quick fixes that don't really solve anything. Like, I totally agree with you, Bill. Like, I think they should focus more on the laning instead of like the lighting situation here.
Yeah, this is something I talk about with oil and gas and other industrial facilities as well, that lighting is not a replacement for good, safety measures like, infrastructural change, making sure you have enough space, making sure you have, you're doing things properly. It can enhance safety, but it by itself is not an effective safety tool. It's only good in conjunction with other things. So, but lighting is one of those things that it's the easiest thing to address in a lot of people's minds. And it's the first thing people reach to in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, I feel like we're in a world where lack of street lighting is becoming the root of all problems.
I really like what you said there, Stephen, too. That's a great way to put it, that lighting can enhance safety, but it itself is not safety. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Well, since we're on the topic of safety, this next one is pretty big for any policy geek at home. The city of Louisville has a lighting plan, which I assume is more indicative of what most communities actually set out to do. So it's apparent from reading the materials that Louisville is attempting to convert over to LED, but for a reason, they aren't doing it in one fell swoop. Instead, they're targeting troubled areas of the city, be it in certain intersections or bars. Louisville commissioned Strand Associates to perform a lighting study on areas predefined by the city. Strand dutifully wrote up a 171-page recommendation. I would note the article tone, which directly plays into the fear narrative spoken about in the previous article. And in this one, it is trying to justify Louisville's having a $1 billion budget to request new lighting. And if you need any further proof of the legs of axioms, here's one from Jeffrey Brown of Louisville Metro Public Works. As an engineer, streetlights are one of the proven countermeasures to improve safety. What am I missing on the crime front? And we had a Chicago Crime Lab study that essentially found that, if you weaponize lighting, you get rid of lighting. Is that what we need to do? Is that the solution to crime? It's just by weaponizing lighting? So we'll note that the Strand report excluded any daytime analysis per Louisville, who were only interested in assessing the nighttime environments. So to translate, it's a very narrow plan from start to finish. It doesn't appear to be part of an integrated crime reduction plan, but it may be. That's just not being included in any of the details presented in the package or in the article itself. So rather, from what I've read, this is just about justifying spending on new lights. And Stephen, you said something earlier where oil industry is very much looking to have lighting justified to kind of prevent lawsuits, right?
Yeah, not just oil, but any big box store, they want to they don't want to get sued for someone getting hurt, or if in the case of oil and gas, they don't want insurance payouts or things like that. They're very cognizant of the legal risk with safety, which I think can cause them to overdo it in some cases. But yeah, in terms of cities, I think it is, like I said earlier, lighting is just the easiest thing for them to do. It's the first thing in the toolkit that they reach to, because the root problems that they really need to address are much more challenging, and they need to appear to the public eye to be doing something.
And you have to justify that big spend, right? You can't just have a new budget saying we're going to go out and buy something for $1 billion. You kind of need to speak to it. Well, the city of Houghton, Michigan, has an idea to install streetlights, but the community isn't exactly thrilled with it. And at one of the recent meetings, a attendee actually spoke up, and this is a quote from that attendee. I did ask one resident who voted yes on this as I was out yesterday, and he said, well, if it had been located on my lot, I would have voted no. And residents actually mentioned how they enjoyed the evening and early morning ambience of the area without streetlights. So they question why all of a sudden street lighting is a concern. Houghton actually tabled the actions for the streetlights, but plans to continue to discuss new streetlights with residents in the new year. That kind of contrasts directly with a big city, right? So
it seems like there's a mixed bag of motives. Like the fear is definitely strong and it's there, especially with that, like I read like 1 billion budget request. And I feel like just the focus on specific troubled areas raises questions like, is it really targeted improvement or just a way to justify spending? And I definitely think this clash between urban development and preserving a community's unique atmosphere is something worth exploring further as a lighting.
Well, we're going to get to that right here, Bonnie. We got one perfect article right here that discusses what you're asking. So staying in the same general ballpark, there's up in Rhode Island, Providence Journal reported that a plan to light soccer fields has pitted Frosty Dew Observatory and Science Center against the Charlestown Council. It all started when the Charlestown Council set out to do a required revision to the Ninigret Park's master plan. The town owns 55 acres of the 227-acre site. Community members are requesting, in addition to rec field lighting to support 450 soccer, football, and cheerleading participants, new pickleball courts, and, of course, road lighting. Deborah Carney, town council president, is cited as saying the park is for the people, the park is for all the residents of Charlestown. Conversely, Frosty Dew Observatory cites servicing hundreds of Charlestown residents that love the beauty of the park, love the beauty of the night sky, and are thrilled that the town is considered the most accessible spot in New England to see the Milky Way. Charlestown, Rhode Island hugs the coast south of Providence, and Ninigret Park is adjacent to a National Wildlife Refuge. Deborah Carney wants to install dark sky-friendly lighting and then appears to be considering the utilization of a timer to appease all parties. Scott McNeil of the Frosty Dew Observatory, on the other hand, sees most of his visitors arrive at sunset and depart within earshot of that thereafter. McNeil believes that lights will be a major problem for the observatory. The issue derives from the shared use of the property by both the observatory and the sports fields. So Charleston actually passed a dark sky ordinance way back in 2012. And I asked John Barentine about this when he was on. And I want to pose to you guys what you think, is protecting the night sky really possible when communities begin to experience that growth? And Bonnie, this is to your point. Is it really possible when communities grow, or are these irreconcilable differences?
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, on this subject, I actually have some inside knowledge on this issue with the city and Frosty Dew Observatory, because back in January, the city council member actually reached out to me on advice on what lighting to choose and sort of get my input on. They wanted to sort of look at what McDonald Observatory had done, what lighting we have for our visitors, which is all very minimal red light, and try to do something similar. And so what they eventually decided on was narrowband amber fixtures, low intensity on bollards in sort of the parking area and some pathways near the observatory. And so to that end, I believe they are installing a few as a trial and just evaluating how it goes. But wildlife was another motivation for it. It wasn't just the observatory, but they were conscious of the light pollution that affects on wildlife. And so when I saw this article, I reached back to the councilman and asked him, I was like, well, it sounds like this is kind of becoming a heated topic, and I was disappointed to see it come to a head. But his response was that the articles has sort of dramatized the narrative, and it's actually not as bad as it makes it seem. The idea to put stadium lighting has not actually gone anywhere. It hasn't actually come before the council yet. So they haven't actually, it's not like they're imminently going to do it. It's not like they've really even said that for sure that they will, because there are other parks in the city nearby and that do already have soccer fields with lighting that could be used. So they haven't really decided if there will be lighting, and if there is stadium lighting at the soccer field, then it would be on strict time controls and only a handful of times a year. So it sounds to me like the community is actually trying really hard to balance the needs of astronomy and dark skies, with public enjoyment. And I do think communities can balance the two, because we've done it here. Fort Davis, Alpine, Marfa in our area are living examples of communities living in harmony with the needs of astronomy. And there's a lot of community pride around it. So I think it can be done. And I think the article has dramatized it a little bit unfairly, frankly.
It sounded like the town actually had some substantial dark sky programs in place. Like they actually had some positive lighting in areas, and they had good fixtures. And it did sound like the town had, a plan already active. So that it did. When I read that, it kind of shocked me that the observatory was kind of the one standing there and raising a town, when the town seemed like they were actually trying to be considerate of the observatory and also placate soccer players.
Yeah, I think it's something that we have to do all the time. And I understand that if you continually compromise, then eventually you erode your position, right? So it's still light. To go back to our first article, even good lighting is still light, and it still can be light pollution. But we also have to balance those needs. And, I think that the observatory's main concern is just the stadium is right there. It is, they're sharing the same park. So even if it is good, it is still an impact. But they're doing what they can, and it's a difficult position. But I think they are going to find a solution.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope it's a good result there. Now, I just want to take a quick break here before we wrap up the show. And just to remind you guys, on our site, we have a whole host of helpful lighting tips and tricks for around the yard and more. And you can also find this show over at Light Pollution News on LinkedIn or at Instagram, light.pollution.news. And definitely stop by our Reddit page at r/Light Pollution News. I have a tendency to throw up things that I stumble across randomly or stuff that was tossed my way that doesn't usually make the show. So there's always some good stuff around. And then lastly, you can find this show on every podcast provider out there, including YouTube. So be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to or from, or however that is working on your end. If you could provide us one quick holiday gift for us, it'd be to just take one quick second to provide us a rating or review, whatever app you're using. Before we get any further, I want to give you guys a chance to plug yourselves. And start with you, Bonnie. Bonnie, why don't you tell us any new things you're working on or anything fun that's coming down the chute?
Nothing fun, just stressful, to be honest. I am starting some research projects on plankton. Zooplankton, phytoplankton, all that stuff near the docks. And I was hoping to explore the effects of anti-fouling paint on those species. I know it all sounds boring, but it's just because anti-fouling paint is something that you scrub on the bottom of your boats to prevent like moss growth and stuff. And I live near a fairly close dock, and I just wanted to kind of explore that gap of like if it really affects the growth of marine life. And I'm going to be testing that in certain lightings. So maybe like they grow better in red lighting, white lighting. I don't know. Adjusting that. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm working on right now. And nothing much interesting, to be honest.
That sounds pretty interesting. That sounds pretty good. I'm really curious about that study right there. A little bit of a high school research. I want to hear it. So keep us in your thoughts when you're working on that.
I will.
Stephen, where can people learn more about you, about McDonald Observatory, about all the great things you're doing down there?
Yeah, you can learn more about McDonald Observatory at McDonaldObservatory.org. And you can learn more about the Greater Big Bend International Dark Sky Reserve, which is we're part of, at BigBendDarkSkyReserve.org. It's the largest area in the world certified by Dark Sky International.
Yeah, and I'll be headed down for the eclipse. I'll be going down that way and swinging out to Big Bend after or before the eclipse. I forget when we're going, but I'll have to stop by. That's been on a box for quite a while. I'm very excited to be going down there.
Yeah, let me know. I'll be sure to meet up.
Yeah, definitely. And Travis, tell us about the new book. Where can people find it?
Yeah, so I have this book that just a few days ago, we had the launch event for it in Minneapolis. It's published by Minnesota Historical Society Press, and it's called Spirits Dancing: The Night Sky, Indigenous Knowledge, and Living Connections to the Cosmos. And you can buy it directly from the Minnesota Historical Society Press website. It's also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I believe maybe Target.com, and a variety of independent booksellers too. So if you just get on Google and type in Spirits Dancing, Travis Novitsky, you'll find a whole bunch of links to order it from. But it's been about 8 years in the making since I first started working on it. So long time coming, and I don't really have any big projects coming up in the near future because I had the documentary last year. I got the book this year. So kind of hoping to just maybe kind of lean back for a little bit, maybe take some photography trips. I head down to the Southwest quite a bit. I'd love to go to Big Bend again. That place has some of the darkest skies I've ever been to. It's pretty cool. Yeah, but you can find my photography at my main photography site is travisnovitsky.com, and that's Novitsky. You can also find the documentary on YouTube by just typing in Northern Nights, Starry Skies. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll have to look for the book. I'm very excited. Great work, Travis. It's no small feat. So that's a busy 2 years.
Yeah, it's been.
Yeah. Well, since we were on the topic of dark sky communities, talking about Big Bend there, dark sky areas, designations, there are 2 new designations this month, and that's Parque Ecologico Oya Barreta in the first urban night sky designation for Mexico. And then we got Vercors, France, which became the 5th dark sky reserve in France. So kudos to those guys. How about this for some technology news, guys? And Stephen, I'm really curious if I'm sure you've dug your teeth into this one. So obviously light is a threat to visual observatories, right? But what if you could eliminate that nuisance altogether? A German company called Stelltrans has come up with an ingenious solution to eliminating light pollution from astronomical observatories. The technology, dubbed the Dark Sky Protector, essentially syncs the camera's shutter to the refresh rate of a LED. Stelltrans believes the technique would be applicable to most LED lights and wouldn't impose any additional costs on those communities. What are your thoughts on that one, Steve? Did you take a look at that? I'm sure that's going around in circles.
Yes, I did take a look at it. I think it is, very interesting, and I think I want to encourage it. But the caveat being that would only work for kind of specific kinds of science and observation. It would not work for visual astronomy, so it wouldn't solve the traditional eyepiece experience, which I think is still incredibly important. But it would work for long exposure astronomy, or if you're on one target for a while and taking a long exposure, and then having gaps where in the frequency of the light. The downside is that a lot of the science that we do at McDonald, and it's going to change on every observatory and even night to night, but we do a lot of really high refresh rate astronomy, looking at, for example, the pulsations in a star on the order of less than a second. And I don't think that technology would be compatible with that kind of science. And then having a shutter moving could introduce kind of optical effects, which could interfere with things. Most of our science is spectroscopy rather than imaging. Mm-hmm. And I'm not really sure if it would be effective for that. So I think it could help some things, but it's not a panacea, right? It's not going to fix the problems overall. We'd still have to address lighting. And then the other thought was, like, my girlfriend is really sensitive to LED flicker. Mm-hmm. And so if, like, for example, if I install a bulb and a dimmable switch and it's not compatible, I can't really tell. But she's like, this light's terrible. Everything looks like a strobe. And I wonder if this technology would make that effect worse or if it's still the same. So, yeah.
That's some good thoughts. Yeah. I didn't even think, I figured it wasn't for every observatory, right? But it is an interesting approach, right? Trying to find a solution to something that seems to, not be going by the wayside anytime soon. Could I interest you guys in a do-it-yourself air, noise, and light pollution measuring station with Wi-Fi connectivity? Sound too good to be true? Harbor X had the $628 system that obtained an average error of 2.67% for each variable measured. These schematics can be found over at show notes, but for those of you sitting at home who might be inclined, this is something pretty interesting. Harbor X actually had the schematics on how to build this little pollution station. So you can measure it. So
interesting.
Here you go, Travis. If we found something for you to do for the next year.
Yeah, that sounds neat. I would love that. I would love like a air, noise, and light combined. That's what appeals to me.
Yeah, it does it all, and all you need to do is they have all the schematics out there. So very, very cool to check out. Definitely would recommend going over to the website and grabbing that link. Few more things to note before we say goodbye to 2023. First, were you aware that Montana has a Trail to the Stars map? In actuality, I don't think it has anything to do with trails, which really piqued my interest initially, but it's a map showing various camping areas featuring the open Milky Way above. Montana showcases just another way for you to participate in astrotourism. And what I like the most about this is that you don't need to have a ton of money to participate. They're campgrounds, not high-end resorts, right? So minus the fact it's Montana, camping versus glamping offers much more reasonable opportunity.
Yeah, I think this comes back to we did the darkness a luxury question many times. And like when you hear stuff like this, it's like, see, it doesn't have to always be expensive or considered a luxury for people to enjoy the beauty of the night sky. Like camping under an open Milky Way sounds like a dream. And like it makes it accessible for like regular folks to just enjoy the dark sky.
It's pretty, I mean, you can spend $25 versus, $400. I mean, the flight there might be a little pricey.
Yeah.
Unless you're Travis, you can probably just drive over.
Well, and Bill, you mentioned this in, I think, multiple times in previous episodes, but I think we're always going to have that barrier, to some degree of, where people live versus where the good high quality dark skies are. But I think increasing access as much as we can, or accessibility to the dark skies once you're in that area, like, and so I just Googled this Montana Trail to the Stars, and yeah, it looks like quite a few sites around the state. So, the more sites that participate, or the more sites that you have, that increases accessibility, because you might not have to drive from, in Minnesota, for example, the southeastern part of the state to the northeastern part, which is, 400 miles or more. You've got sites that are closer to you. So I think anything we can do to keep increasing that accessibility is great.
Travis, you nailed it. I was speaking earlier this year with the ranger over at Cherry Springs here in Pennsylvania, and he had mentioned they're trying to put down essentially stargazing programs lower in the state. So they're trying to bring it down lower to closer to the cities. And with the different state parks they have that still have pretty decent sky. And for that exact reason, because, if anything you can do to make it more accessible in the areas that already have good skies, right? Maybe part of it is that there's just a scarcity of opportunities to actually partake in it, and maybe not a scarcity of areas that actually have a good natural light.
Right. I think the scarcity of activities is key there, because, like I grew up in a dark area, so I'm naturally comfortable going outside at night. And, again, like living very close to, well, I'm surrounded by forests. I got Superior National Forest is right at my doorstep. That's, I think, 1 million acres or something like that. But folks coming from a city don't have that inherent sense of comfortableness with being outside, especially in a wild area, because of course they're worried about the bears. And I get asked that question a lot. Aren't you scared going out there? And I'm like, well, scared of what? And I'm more scared of going to downtown Minneapolis and walking across the street. I'm more likely to get hurt there by hit by a car or tripping on a curb or something, than I am to get attacked by a bear up here.
Right. It's kind of like the known fears and the unknown.
Yeah. The unknown is definitely what freaks people out. But what I like telling people, and this is going to vary, of course, depending on, where you live and what the layout of the cities in the area that you live. But in terms of, the largest metro area closest to me is Minneapolis, St. Paul. So I got asked this question at the book launch event was, what can I do to gain access to good night skies without having to go very far? And at least here in Minnesota, like Minneapolis, St. Paul is the largest light dome that Minnesota has. So just getting north of that light dome and knowing that there isn't much more light pollution north of that, don't go south of the cities, because then you're going to be looking, if you're thinking Northern Lights, you're going to be looking right over the Twin Cities, and you're just going to see the glow of the cities. But all you got to do is go a little bit further north, maybe even just 30 minutes outside of, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and you've got good dark skies, or, reasonably good. So
lucky man.
Sometimes you don't have to go very far, but
you're lucky.
Sometimes
man.
You do. Well, that's not for me. That's, my advice to people is just get out of the city to whatever extent you can, because you're going to increase your night sky visibility, even if you're just a little ways out of a lot of cities, not all of them, but many of them.
Well, I want to ask you guys about actual hikes now, because we looked at the trail of essentially campgrounds, not really a trail. Do you guys have any favorite stargazing hikes? I'll name one. Yeah, like just hikes that are spectacular at night. And this came because of an idea. There's a Times Union article that talked about some of the best hikes in the Northeast for stargazing, or just kind of like a night hike where you actually get to see the immersive sky. And they noted Twin or Wittenberg Mountains up in the Catskills. And I would suggest Cascade Mountain in Adirondacks, which is it's like a 4-mile hike in and 4-mile round trip, actually. And it's clear on the top, and you can see pretty much everything there.
Well, this is kind of funny because again, where I live, there's a lot of hiking trails, but I wouldn't consider most of them very good night sky hikes because we have so many trees, and these trails are really like canopies when you hike through them. When you're on the trail, you don't see the sky very much until you get to an overlook or something. But there are places like, let's see, I number of hikes I could recommend in the Southwest, but one of my favorites was hiking down to, not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but Owachomo Bridge in Natural Bridges National Monument. That was just incredible. Relatively easy hike, if I remember correctly. Not too long, but it's incredible. You're up at 8,000 feet or something like that, and you do have a lot of airplanes flying over, but you see a ton of stars there, and you're seeing them over this huge natural sandstone arch bridge. Just incredible, and you see the stars along the whole hike. But yeah, up here in Minnesota, probably shorter hikes would be better, because then you're not hiking through the forest canopy for 3 or 4 miles sometimes. Yeah, so the North Shore State Parks are great because they've got a number of short trails that have open views next to Lake Superior that are just incredible.
One of my favorite hikes in Big Bend Ranch State Park, which is a massive state park adjacent to the national park, are there basically anything in the interior of the park. It's very remote. And if you're hiking in the summer, then every hike is a night hike, because if you hike in the summer, you You will die if you go out in the sun. So, yeah, I've taken many walks in moonlight and stuff like that down there, and all the wildlife comes out, and it's a totally different world, and I always love it.
How about we wrap things up here? Let's end 2023 on a good note, shall we? Let's set aside our nostalgia for a moment and think back to a time far and near that a natural night show slowly blanketed your daytime. In many ways, this next one really gets at the heart of the connection to our unappreciated and more unacknowledged night. It comes to us from the family-owned Independent Mountain Times newspaper based in Killington, Vermont. The piece titled Living a Dream, Stars in a Dark Night Sky recount one individual's lifelong connection to the natural day-night cycle. I think the following quote best sums up what many of us have already experienced. No matter the time of day, I love laying on my blanket in the middle of a field and staring up at the sky. While you are the one that walks through the forest to create movement, the sky appears exactly the opposite. Only when you lie perfectly still can you track the movements of the elements. The clouds rolling by, the planets slowly making their way, or tracking the stars from night to night. It's all right there if you just sit and let it pass you by. I was there to be in the moment, to get lost in meditative study of the sky around me, to pay close attention to that I believed I could feel the earth moving underneath the starry sky. I love watching the clouds move around the moon, changing the feeling of a night from peaceful to eerie in just a few minutes. But my favorite is when Orion the Hunter starts to rise in the sky. It's really one of the only constellations I know. And in our part of the world, it rises as winter comes. It reminds me to get ready, to start prepping my home for the upcoming changes for the season. I mean, obviously, I could look at the leaves to see that winter was coming. But the sky also tells a story when we see it. I want to thank my guests, Travis Novitsky, Bonnie Peng, Stephen Hummel. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. From both of us here at Light Pollution News Podcast, we wish you a happy New Year and a safe and healthy holiday season. We record Light Pollution News on the second to last Sunday of every month at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Be sure to find all the links to today's show over at lightpollutionnews.com. Signing off, I'm Bill McKinney, helping shine the light only where it's needed. Thank you once more, folks, and have a great December.